My introduction to David Lynch was watching Lost Highway in either 1999 or 2000. In my memory, it was relatively newer, but not the same year it was released, and I was enthralled and terrified by it, but in an obsessive and somewhat weird way. I had an unrelated fixation on tape recorders when I was a kid, literally the handheld type that Agent Cooper uses. I didn't have any idea what Twin Peaks was. That was before my time and difficult to track down, but I would just record random shit from TV and from being dragged around on errands or forced to go to church or whatever, and then play them back and revisit them or change the playback speed and make it sound funny. An attempt to create YTP with no Y in sight. Anyways, I had recorded the confrontation between Bill Pullman's character and the man who is in his house right now, and I would just listen to it and envision it. That way I could sort of carry that around with me beyond the point where I lost access to the film. It's such an absurd scene that stays with me because it seemed to ignore the rules of other movies I knew in a way that felt otherworldly and unsettling. It didn't make any sense why this sort of thing was suddenly happening. Even as a kid, I was conditioned to understand when a movie dipped into surrealism. The scene would often end with a character jolting out of bed and sighing with relief, but that never came. The movie just kept going, as if the waking up part had happened somewhere between a scene change. And for sure, I was very young. Like 9 or 10. So much of Lost Highway was dealing with themes and ideas that were a little too high level for me, but I certainly knew how it made me feel, which was something I hadn't considered until that point. Like up until then, my relationship with movies was as an extension of music video or background noise, more or less. I kind of mythologized David Lynch and this film and had much the same experience in 2002. I do remember that year specifically when watching a rented copy of Mulholland Drive at a friend's house. Not long after this, I would have regular access to not completely prohibitively slow motion internet by the standards of the time, and realized, oh shit, he's been at this for a while, huh? It's not just these two spiritually similar slices of cinema. I'm sure I've mentioned it in other videos, but I attempted to go to school for film in my 20s, and I was soon struck by two grim realizations. 1, that costs money. 2, I did not have this money. And 3, it was 3 things. I don't like working on complicated creative endeavors with others. We had to write short, one-take film scripts, so it was probably like a 5 to 10 minute narrative all in one take, and then pitch them to a group of about 5 other students. And the moment I was confronted with the possibility of explaining to a group of people I did not know, beyond the initial comparison of each other's cult film shirts, to their real faces, what my weird little David Lynch ripoff was, and have their grade possibly hinge on that idea, I began slowly receding into myself before dropping out, even after grouping with a guy in a blue velvet shirt who complimented my Videodrome shirt. That just made it worse. Now he'd for sure know how poorly I was ripping off Lynch. Yes, I was failing other classes, but that's besides the point. I have mostly him and, like Gilliam, Cronenberg, the usual film head suspects, to thank for fueling that failure. Also, pretending this is a judgment-free space, probably Kevin Smith, more than I tend to recall, because when you think about it, truly one of the more important lessons on the journey to becoming a filmmaker is the realization that, anybody can make one of these things? That mirrors my journey in becoming a video game content person. You come across someone hitting a lot of numbers and you give it a watch and you're like, for this guy, the bar must be pretty low. He doesn't even have a robot dog. I like to think I have been that channel for at least 1 or 2 others. Even though film, the cinema, was my thing for a long time, video game content is easier to break into and less annoying to deal with as far as copyright issues. So I became a video gamer of sorts. But I soon found there's plenty of high-level awareness of Lynch's work, or at the very least an openness to the idea amongst that community. I'm guilty of overusing the term Lynchian in reference to any video game that features dreamlike qualities intermingling with 1950s Americana, idyllic towns, and industrial nightmares, but there is a reason reason for that. It's not coming from nothing. The influence of David Lynch on creatives of all mediums is overt, and the more familiar you become with his body of work, the more you'll just start seeing it in everything, especially video games, such as, say, Silent Hills 1 through 4, and then you'll really notice when it's missing or done incorrectly, like in every piece of Silent Hill media to follow. The other day I came across a Reddit post in which there was a small argument between a baffled Twin Peaks fan and a presumably younger, dumbass. I was intrigued by the back and forth between someone who was aware of Lynch's influence on video games and film and TV and writing and so forth, and another who had never even heard of this guy until suddenly everyone was making tearful eulogies in his honor. And it wasn't even that they had never heard of him. That's something I can understand. It was the complete lack of curiosity of even entertaining how some old guy from Montana had anything to do with video games and anime and things that seem worlds apart from each other. I can see the absurdity in such a notion. It simply can't be that the specter of this man made its way into mediums that he was mostly oblivious to. It would be an astounding feat to pull off for a person from this place, which he most assuredly was not. A sizable swath of the internet tends to remember David Lynch not through any specific work, but through a series of meme-worthy interviews.
Total fucking bullshit.
Moments where he comes off as an eccentric weirdo, reviling the use of telephones to absorb film, excitedly consuming a mildly uncommon combination of snack foods, chain smoking in the director's chair and yelling at an AD for suggesting a 5-minute static shot of a ceiling fan be cut down to 4.
Who gives a fucking shit how long a scene is?
It's wild that he just was that way. Half these things just organically came from him with no humor intended, as though he were a stranger in this world, bemused by our foreign customs and captivated by the beauty hidden in ordinary places.
This is one of the most beautiful places on Earth.
He didn't know what Lynchian was, that his ideas were so unique and particular that they warranted a term for them. On the Criterion release for Eraserhead, the cast is interviewed and they recall how he would wear formal attire that was torn and frayed and had cigarette burn holes and would have on up to 3 neckties. There are accounts of him not even auditioning actors, just kind of staring at them and saying, yeah, you're in. Everything they produced came from a clearly personal, spiritual place, ideas, dreams, and memories reeled in on a creative journey that he often likened to fishing. Because of this, the narrative meaning of things, the purpose of a creation's existence is left unsolved for you to activate a part of your brain that is usually passive. It's something you're on board with or not. These are the ideas I found. This is the order they go in. It looks like this sometimes and it sounds like this. What is this for you?
What the hell? What the hell? What the hell?
I think it's a common misconception that there is no meaning to any of his films, or that the meaning is hidden from Lynch himself. He made them. I'm sure he knew what everything he made meant to him, even if it was a little delayed. But to speak of that, as the dreamer of the dream, would rob you of your chance to have it mean something to you.
Believe it or not, Eraserhead is my most spiritual film.
Elaborate on that.
No, I won't.
I don't reminisce on all these things to prop myself up as a true David Lynch understander. I'll be the first to admit that there are plenty of things the guy's created in his lifetime that I couldn't fucking tell you a single thing about what it meant. You know, he brought a lot of things with him from the other place. He made a lot of things. It's something I admired about him a great deal. He never really stopped making things. But I can certainly tell you how a thing made me feel and what it made me think about, what I found neat or disconcerting. He was good at that for sure. You're never quite as frightened by something as you are when you also don't know why or how something is happening. It's a whole array of feelings that you tend to turn off when consuming. I'm just gonna glance over at my shelf of Kino to find something. 2010's Legion. Lynch's first feature-length motion picture, 1977's Eraserhead, was made completely divorced from the film industry, technically a long gestating student film made over the course of 4 years. There are shots of its lead character, a nebbish weirdo named Henry, walking through a doorway and entering a room years later. David Lynch has said that his favorite thing about filmmaking is going to another world, and this is maybe the most immersed in another world that he ever was, seeing as though he had to literally live in it on account of having no money. Filming would come to a halt every now and then when he needed to find money to pay his crew and actors, and would occasionally convince them to aid in a paper route and then divvy up the $25 that paid. Even though it took quite a long time to make, it would also take quite a long time to find its audience. After being rejected by several film festivals and distributors, it was picked up as a midnight movie, joining a collection of other ironic, violent, horny, or otherwise counterculture films like Pink Flamingos and El Topo, to be given that most edgiest of time slots, just running years on end even with hardly anyone showing up, providing a psychologically traumatizing backdrop for the ingestion of psychedelics or the conception of children. Either way, whatever results from that screening is going to be fucked up. Even with this boosted cool factor, it was still a year or two before word of mouth would carry the film to the same cult following as its contemporaries. The book Midnight Movies, From the Margins to the Mainstream, sort of paints Eraserhead as the last of the true midnight movies. Sure, oddball films like Altered States and The Evil Dead continued to find success with that time slot, but the pipeline to mainstream was less genuine, and big studios started to accept and elevate the subversive content in the original run of midnight movies. You can also sense a lot of experimentation. The midnight movies to follow Eraserhead were a little more self-aware, becoming a genre unto itself, primed for commodification. Less punk, more, Sex Pistols punk.
As soon as video came out, it was over. You had your own midnight movie in your house where you could smoke pot, you could have sex, you could do everything that people did in midnight movies. You can do it in the privacy of your own home.
The magic of Eraserhead was that it was truly unlike anything else at the time, or the time in between then and present. Although, I'll tell you what looks like a David Lynch production. The White House. The other midnight movies were pushing boundaries with their content, but I think Eraserhead was also pushing a boundary in its dreaminess, atmosphere, and in its defiance at being easily understood or explained. Eraserhead plays like a montage of mundane and yet existentially dreadful events. It doesn't really have what you could classify as a plot, more so the trajectory of a dream, which you could loosely describe as a man finding himself suddenly dragged back into a broken relationship, having to take care of a baby-like entity, and constantly wishing he was someone or somewhere else, which is something of a through line in many of his films. But beyond that premise, it works the way dreams tend to, where things that seem out of place or unsettling are only really examined after waking. It makes sense in the moment. The timeline doesn't need to follow the rhythm of conventional film storytelling. It has a very "and then this happened" flow, but I've always appreciated its capacity for heightening the anxiety and tension in social situations, and framing them as an inescapable nightmare.
Did you and Mary have sexual intercourse?
Everyone is horrible. Everything is beautifully ugly and industrial and dirty. Everything except a misshapen woman that Henry sees in his radiator is the worst version of itself. And yet, Eraserhead is also a very beautiful and funny film. Pretty much the entirety of the scene where he has dinner with his ex's parents is so funny. The perpetually excited father yelling over the roaring sound of these massive pipes running through their home.
I put every damn pipe in this neighborhood! Yeah. And people think pipes grow in their home. Well, they sure as hell don't.
It's a piece of media that, jokes aside, is a pretty good litmus test to see whether or not two or more people are into the same brand of weird shit.
And depending on their reaction, they stay with them or not.
I have had, and continue to have, a lot of difficulty speaking to people I don't know, or even people I do know most of the time. I'm only doing this right now because I'm alone. The listener at this moment is a hypothetical. Even after attempting to take a public speaking class, that shit didn't take. It was just a stressful fucking semester, and then I went back to being Johnny Tightlips. It sounds silly, but things like a shirt from a cult movie you like is something for me. it's a hook. I can talk about like 3 different things in a way that somewhat resembles what other people do every day of their goddamn life. And films is one of them. Back to those Criterion special features, Charlotte Stewart, who plays Mary, explains that right from the jump, David clearly liked really long takes, as though he were intentionally pushing a scene to its breaking point in hopes of it becoming something else by the end.
Well, Henry, what do you know?
Oh, I don't know much of anything.
And that something is usually strange and awkward or funny. It's disruptive to the way you think films are supposed to flow. To use an example outside of Lynch's work, if you've ever seen the movie Samurai Cop, and I have a lot, well, the Riff Tracks version anyway, there's a shot where this accidentally happens. It's in the middle of the most tropey buddy cop movie scene, where the mismatched partners have gone too far trying to crack the case and they're being chewed out by the chief. So to play a little goof on him and break the tension, Samurai Cop's partner kisses the chief on the head and runs away, leading to the chief yelling at him. And at a certain point you start thinking, and cut. And cut. But it just keeps going, and the actor is on camera realizing that nobody is calling cut, so he does everything he can to will a cut into existence. It's been confirmed by the cast that it was just a weird moment where the director didn't call cut, and then he left the entire take in. And because of that, I think it's the first thing I think about when I think about that movie. In a movie that already has so many things you'd think were bizarre enough to remember.
Would you like to fuck me?
Bingo.
Weirdly, in the book Lynch on Lynch, he describes not so much the first draft of Eraserhead, but the idea he had that later oozed out of him as Eraserhead. The original story, even hearing him explain it, sounds unexpectedly unambiguous, as though he took this perhaps real-life experience of cheating on your partner and enduring the consequences of that and added a poetic framing device. Every part of the process after that is pretty par for the course Lynchian. He was just like, yeah, then I started thinking about a guy's head falling off and then bouncing on the floor before a little boy picks it up and takes it to a pencil factory. Maybe that first idea would have taken point if he hadn't moved to Philadelphia in the 1970s, a place he describes in an almost Lovecraftian sense that drove him to hermitdom. And much like one of Lovecraft's stories, the experiences he describes are so bizarre that surely there was some other element informing their description.
And she said, "Oh, my nipples hurt." And she was squeezing her breasts and standing in front of me, squeezing them and shaking. "My nipples hurt."
So I don't think it would be a stretch to describe Henry as clearly something of a stand-in for where Lynch was emotionally. A reluctant father who lives in filthy industrial decay. Coming into Lynch's career at his neo-noir arc, and then going back to Eraserhead was at first a little disorienting. I think because of the sort of free-flowing poetic quality to it, and, well, the whole grotesque puppet thing, but there is a rhyme to it. Throughout my adolescence and into my early 20s, I attended a lot of cons and stuff, like when you could just show up to San Diego Comic-Con day of and purchase a ticket, and the iconic Eraserhead shirt was a sort of secret handshake between consumers of weird, obscure shit. That's one of those things that I do have a nostalgic longing for, and it can simply never be reproduced. Going to a large convention on a whim, casually, and finding like a bootleg of a weird shot-on-video Japanese horror movie, and feeling like you had some kind of artifact from another world. Nowadays, what? I just start Googling a movie and then get tired and go back to spacing out? As it tends to go with indie filmmakers who develop a hit by some measure, he was soon offered an honest-to-goodness studio film with a star-studded cast of British icons giving Oscar-baiting performances, and of all people it was Mel Brooks who extended the offer. There's an old interview with Brooks in which he's asked what he saw in Eraserhead that sold him on Lynch for The Elephant Man, and in so many words he basically says that he got it.
That baby was a monster.
He was picking up what Lynch was putting down and wanted to utilize a director he could tell was going to produce great things before anybody else could.
He took a chance on me based on what he saw in Eraserhead.
Are you crazy?
The secondary anecdote required when speaking about this movie was that Lynch, unable to find funding for a script he wrote titled Ronnie Rocket, his white whale of sorts, shopped around for someone else's script to direct, and famously was presented with 4 scripts, the first being The Elephant Man, which he immediately pursued without ever hearing the names of the other 3, because an explosion happened in his head. An explosion that, when pressed to explain what that means, elaborated it was
Just a knowingness with a sound.
The plot is a loose adaptation of a chapter in a 1920s book titled The Elephant Man and Other Reminiscences, but is substantially less surreal and dreamlike. It takes place in Victorian England and follows Anthony Hopkins' character Dr. Treves as he comes across a greatly deformed man being displayed in a carnival freak show. Seeing the opportunity to advance his career, he pays the carnival owner to essentially borrow him and present him to his colleagues. Though when he's returned to the carnival owner, he's beaten until he requires medical attention. Treves admits him to his hospital and continues to care for him, learning that he's not some kind of creature, but rather an educated man named John Merrick, who has been too afraid to show his intelligence. This leads to the guilt-ridden realization that he's been perpetuating his dehumanization and treating him not too dissimilar from the awful carnival owner. Everyone just wants to put him on display and make money off of pointing and gawking at him, while he's just an innocent man, just a normal man.
I think that before he gets here, I should tell you something about him. Something disturbing.
Of Lynch's filmography, this is probably the one I revisit the least, because it is a profoundly tragic movie, full of incredible performances for sure, but yeah, it's a fucking bummer. Like, just thinking of the scene where he wishes he could sleep like a normal person and asks Treves fruitlessly if he can cure him, and he doesn't sugarcoat it in the slightest to give him some false hope.
Can you cure me? No. No, we can care for you, but we can't cure you. No.
It's a knife in the gut, but more importantly, the little creative sparks that only Lynch could produce are kind of faint. Not to say gone entirely by any means, there are still lingering shots of industrial machinery and smoke billowing from chimneys. The backdrop is still one of industrialized horror, just set in a more specific age. That is a personal fixation of Lynch's that shows here in these wonderful, not even like establishing shots, just interesting cutaway transitions. They sort of anchor the atmosphere of filth and rot. All these things that I enjoy a great deal seem to really upset famous film misunderstander Roger Ebert, who had a history of being upset by Lynch's films for baffling reasons.
The movie starts out with him snuffling, he can't talk, he can't say anything. Later on, the 23rd Psalm, Romeo and Juliet. Where did he learn to speak like this? How was he brought along?
My guy wanted more Elephant Man lore. Where did he get the Bible to learn that psalm? And what edition was it? It doesn't make sense. Also worth noting that though The Elephant Man was nominated for 8 Academy Awards and would win none of them, it was because of this film that the category of Best Makeup was invented.
The winner is Rick Baker for An American Werewolf in London.
I'm so depressed I don't know what I'm doing.
The makeup of the titular Elephant Man is sort of what the whole movie hinges on, and it was created using an actual 100-year-old plaster cast of the real person the film is based on. It took 12 hours to assemble it onto John Hurt's person, his name becoming quite literal. John did indeed hurt. Because of the difficulties Lynch and the crew experienced getting the makeup to look correct and stay on the actor and move with him, Mel Brooks suggested they spend the first half of the movie teasing teasing his full appearance before a big reveal, which was a really effective and sort of immersive choice. The build-up is that of a universal monster, so it puts you in the place of one of the characters, averting their eyes in shock, but really, it's just a guy who lived the saddest life one could imagine, which is not an ideal superpower. The true oddity and outlier of Lynch's films is questionably 1984's Dune, the first crack at adapting Frank Herbert's novel. Well, that made it off the ground anyway. I think The Elephant Man and Dune and The Straight Story have independently all been referred to as his most accessible film, but I think that might be more fitting to say about the others, when Dune is seen even by its creator to be a failure, which he years later tried to correct by adapting Dune Messiah for a sequel, but that was interrupted when, everybody remembered, like, hang on, I think we lost money on that one. The plot concerning several planets' desire to control the production of the spice, which alters your consciousness and allows for instant travel across dimensions, a substance which exists on one planet in the universe named Arrakis, a desert world full of massive skyscraper-sized worms, and if it wasn't obvious already, its author was on a lot of mushrooms when he wrote this. In the midst of this conflict, a character named Paul Atreides, played by Kyle MacLachlan, rises to fulfill several prophecies, becoming a demigod of sorts, and rallies the planet's original inhabitants, the Fremen, into acting out a jihad on both the people of Arrakis and their sworn enemy, the Harkonnens. What Lynch's movie is doing is strictly adhering to a hugely compressed outline that needs to hit a series of key moments with a studio-mandated slant away from the story's dreariness or examination of cult followings, and instead focuses on the heroics and romance of Dune. The studio wouldn't allow a runtime beyond 2 hours and 16 minutes, the reason being that any longer would cut down on the amount of times the film could be screened in a day, and thus the amount of tickets one could sell in a day. And so he made a film that was 2 hours and 16 minutes long. Because of this, a lot of the things that are solely the input of David Lynch are environmental. They're in the minutia of the world, it's Baroque clashing with industrial design, and in things that were never brought up in the book, many of them delightfully fucked. So his voice is all over this, but echoing into the rafters, because there is a lot to get through in half the time needed, and a third of the time Lynch wanted. It's such a cliche to ask that age-old question into the nerd void of what if Lynch had taken up George Lucas's offer to direct Return of the Jedi instead of this? Would that film have had the bravery to include the rat juice box? Something tells me we wouldn't get that. This is coincidentally why I have never watched the modern Dune films, because if that's not in there, then like, what am I showing up for? What does a Frenchman know about Kino? That's all. I just wanted that statement to sit there for a bit. It seems misguided even if you think about it cynically, because they clearly wanted to have a Star Wars. That was the goal. So then why not chop this up and keep it rolling as long as possible? You just strangled the opportunity for a sequel in its crib and started pumping out action figures of Sting milking a cat. I don't get you. Lynch was offered the opportunity to direct by producer Dino De Laurentiis, who sent him the book, which he loved because despite being hard sci-fi, the narrative was tied up with other genres and themes that heightened it. There's plenty of prophetic dreams, religious symbolism, and alien cultures to play with. The kind of stuff that would send Lynch's hands wiggling out, reeling in dreams. He went into this production in some respect knowing that he would not have Final Cut, which incidentally Mel Brooks gave him on The Elephant Man just out of trust, and judging by interviews, he sort of naively thought it would just work out, and if he treated directing Dune the same way he approached his last two movies, then it would just be the same thing but bigger. I think the realization of what that meant for the next few years made the process of directing it progressively more grueling.
I really blocked out a lot of that.
Because, I mean...
It was a very painful experience.
And after the movie came out and flopped, I think that hit him really hard. Not because his movie didn't make numbers, but because he entered this with a movie in his head, and more that movie was being stripped away. He had relinquished control and made compromises with his vision for those that would care about the numbers. And even then, no numbers. So it's like, what was the point of working on that for 3 years if it was a lose-lose?
So it was a slow dying the death and a terrible experience.
In interviews and press material that directly followed, his demeanor was kind of humble and vague and mostly eaten by complimenting the crew.
I'm thankful that I've done it, and like I said, it's the hardest thing I ever did, and what happens to it now is not up to me, it's up to the people. I just hope for the best.
It doesn't give you any entertainment, even on the level of looking at the special effects and the wonderful things happening on the screen.
They're quite cheap, actually.
They're not that...
But with more distance between it, he seemed openly ashamed of it, sometimes shutting down questions about it.
Do you regret making it?
Yes.
It wasn't until late in his life that his opinion on it seemed to soften.
I'm still happy that you like it, and... I like many parts of Dune myself.
And at the very least, it introduced him to Kyle MacLachlan and Everett McGill, who he would work with several times after. I'm of the opinion that Dune is a lot of fun. It's got some incredible visuals, sets, matte paintings, miniatures, and a persistent weirdness that extends beyond what was on the page. I share Frank Herbert's reaction to it in that the story is there, much of its compromise was for retaining that, and in between there are things that are brilliant. At around the 1.5 hour point, you can feel it. Suddenly things start moving, and it's like montage after montage. I can't even imagine how long they dwell on conquering Shai Hulud in the remake, but I imagine it's longer than 4 minutes and doesn't have the storybook ending engineered by Studio Notes, in which Paul Atreides becomes a messiah and that is seen as an absolute good. No blowback, or fallout, or remaining concerns. I can absolutely understand associating the film with disappointment of not getting to make the movie you set out to make. But that happens all the time, and the result is usually a lot shittier, and has far fewer scenes of Patrick Stewart charging into battle with a pug in one arm and a gun in the other. As early as during Eraserhead's editing, Lynch had the idea for Blue Velvet, and it started as dreams and evolved into drawings, and there's an interview with Jack Nance where he remembers being shown the drawing and Lynch saying, "One day we're making this," while pointing to a drawing of a building that said Blue Velvet on it and presumably a stick figure with a gas canister. In retrospect, Lynch was able to see the failure of Dune as freeing. He knew what he wanted now and knew what he would not compromise on. So with Blue Velvet, he was firm on having Final Cut, but that meant having half the budget as other films produced by Dino De Laurentiis. What may have been the marketing boost that offset this was the fact that on release, Blue Velvet was seen as highly controversial in its violence and tone and all-around rough subject matter. Not that these things hadn't been put to film for years before, but because it wasn't a midnight movie or exploitative schlock. It had a wide release and respected actors in it.
Why did you want to do that? Why tell that story? Why is that so important to you? Do you think that's the purpose of films, or of some films, to really disturb and upset and horrify people? Do you think you're a genius or a really sick person?
Well, Valerie, I don't know.
Lynch would describe the meaning of this film in great detail as the mysteries of darkness and love, full stop. It follows Jeffrey, a college student who finds a severed ear in a field, and Sandy, the daughter of a police detective, as they begin to unravel a mystery involving a lounge singer and her family who are being held captive by a deranged gangster. Blue Velvet was something of a revelation to me because originally knowing his work through the modern, noir sort of stuff, the examination of twisted underworld and surreal horror. This was a really heavy dose of that. There is this clear divide between idyllic Americana daylight and grim dark seedy underbelly of night, almost as if the two are completely different planes of existence. And this is displayed perfectly in the opening scene where we see Jeffrey's father having a heart attack on his bright green lawn with a white picket fence. It's again near comedic, the contrast of this guy twitching and groaning on the ground while a child watches on, confused, and a dog just just bites at the water flowing from his garden hose, as though not even this could kill the vibe. And then the camera leaves this scene digging into the earth, which is dark and full of skittering bugs. It sort of reads like a dry run of ideas that would surface in Twin Peaks. There is a lot of personal experience and feelings, good or bad, that make up the skeleton of this film. I think this might be the only one he directed where he outright drew some kind of comparison to himself and the protagonist, saying, yeah, this guy's like me. He dresses like me down to the button-ups buttoned all the way up and does the kind of things I have thought about doing. So instinctively, I think that a radar starts going off in most people, assuming he means, yeah, I too would break into the home of a woman I don't know, spy on her, and have a strange sadomasochistic relationship with her. But I think he more so meant that life presents all these doorways into mystery and parts of life we don't organically experience, but know is there, and it's exciting watching a story about someone that does do that, that finds a severed ear in the grass and pursues that mystery to wherever it will take them, instead of just calling the police and letting this live forever in the back of your head as an anecdote at parties. I think voyeurism was an important theme he wanted to play with as well. Kyle MacLachlan's Jeffrey is out of complete morbid curiosity observing this mystery until he is drawn into it and it becomes scary and real.
I mean, it sounds like a good daydream, but actually doing it's too weird. It's too dangerous.
I wasn't around to witness the controversy of Blue Velvet firsthand, but I suppose it's understandable given that it deals with a woman's abuse and is sort of unflinching in the horror of that. But at least from the future looking back, it seems like there was a lot of shallow reads of it, and often weirder to me, instances of critics accusing Lynch of degrading his actors, who all have nothing but kind words to say about the man and the material.
But he asked Isabella Rossellini in this movie to be undressed and humiliated on the screen, as few actresses ever have been, certainly in non-porno roles.
I think most caught on to the fact that the main source of outrage, a scene where Rossellini's character, Dorothy, staggers outside naked, crying, and covered in injuries, was meant to evoke normal human things like fear, sympathy, and confusion. You're meant to read this as something has gone horribly wrong, and you don't even want to think about what it was. It's a gut-wrenching scene that is difficult to watch.
I don't think it was exploitive because it wasn't titillating, first of all. You know, it wasn't titillating, it wasn't done to, it wasn't sex and violence to attract an audience or to go. It's actually, some of it, it's very painful and sometimes even repelling.
The director was victimizing Isabella Rossellini, his actress. I felt that he was treating her in a way that embarrassed me, and apparently she didn't agree because then she moved in with him.
Yeah, right. From the way Lynch talks about it, this was sort of key to the idea of the movie and was based on a real experience he witnessed as a child.
And she came closer and closer, and my brother started to cry. Something was bad wrong with her. I wanted to do something for her, but I was little. I didn't know what to do.
I think if you're going to explore abuse in your art, it may as well be reflective of reality and not a fig-leafed generalization. It's not treating it like other films have, where Dorothy is just caught up in a bad crowd. And if some white knight could come along and sweep her off her feet, then why, she'd live happily ever after. It's a lot more complicated and psychological than that. Abuse can sort of rewrite the way you behave and handle situations, and sometimes it can take the rest of your days to deprogram from it and deal with that trauma. Even Jeffrey has this sort of Lord of the Rings ending where he's returned home having survived this ordeal but won't see the world the same way anymore. Lynch was pretty good at crafting complicated characters that were never one thing and never perfect, never just a hero, never just a villain, and never just a victim, which was like the whole thrust of Fire Walk with Me, taking a person that was an idea and making them a person again. I mean, most of the moves Jeffrey elects to make in this film are the actions of a lunatic. Does this mean there isn't the occasional point in his body of work that I say, David, what are you doing here? No.
Let me see him.
I'm just viewing it charitably. Based on other things he's done, I'm assuming there's a purpose. Lynch has proven to be rather progressive in some ways, like including a trans character in Twin Peaks long before trans people had been dragged into culture war bullshit. And some of the language around it is clunky, but at no point are they treated like a joke character or really any different from the rest of the cast.
Dennis? It's a long story, but actually I prefer Denise if you don't mind. Okay.
So I've always just held that there's no way that guy is in him, you know?
And when you became Denise, I told all your colleagues, those clown comics, to fix their hearts or die.
There's a genuineness and honesty to things he creates, and even when his films dealt with despicable characters that do awful things or grotesque and unsettling things, I've never felt like there was hate propelling it. If there is a silver lining to his passing, at least he can't undermine all of what I just said. It's so crazy though, how right Ebert was, and how everyone agreed with him, and how Blue Velvet didn't capture the imagination of a whole generation of artists across wildly disparate mediums or quality levels.
Fucking look at me. Fucking look at me. Don't you fucking look at me! Don't you fucking look at me! Don't look at me! Don't you fucking look at me! I'll fuck anything that moves!
I'll fuck anything that moves! You know what the fuck you looking at? I'll kick your fucking ass.
What kind of beer do you like? Heineken? Fuck that shit! Pabst Blue Ribbon!
Is this all we bought to drink? No Heineken or anything?
Fuck that Euro shit. This is Pabst Blue American Ribbon, my friend.
Dennis Hopper, Blue Velvet. Oh, I'm slutty. Oh, I'm slutty.
Hey, you want to go for a ride?
No thanks.
No thanks. What does that mean?
No thanks. No thanks? What that mean?
You know what a love letter is? It's a bullet from a fucking gun, fucker.
Well, I'm going to send you a love letter, my dear. Do you know what that is? It's a bullet straight from my gun to your heart.
I don't want to go.
Go where?
For a ride.
A ride. Hell, that's a good idea. Okay, let's go.
Wanna go for a ride?
Not really.
Not really what?
All right.
A ride, yeah. Let's go for a ride.
The entire last 20 minutes of that movie are both so tense and so beautifully filmed and just perfectly fucked up. The scene that Jeffrey stumbles on with the two dead bodies, one not entirely dead, but his brain is showing and he's left standing. It's so baffling to him that he for a second removes himself from the story. He's like, you know what? I think this is where I get off this mystery train. But of course, it's too late. You wanted to play detective and now you have to confront the big bad. But for sure, I think about the stillness and otherworldly feeling of that scene a lot. And being gamer-pilled, I had theorized some connection to Silent Hill in the radio that's running on the standing corpse. Lynch liked to find any opportunity to pump in low-frequency tones just simmering in the background of scenes, coaxing a physiological response from the viewer. I mean, you watch Eraserhead with the sound up, and it sounds like you're on the fucking Starship Enterprise half the time. But here you have this slightly ringing tone of the radio going as he just takes in the horror of everything, and then it jump scares you by squawking to life and warning Jeffrey of impending danger. After wrapping production on the pilot episode of Twin Peaks, Lynch again attempted to get his script, Ronnie Rocket, made into a film.
Were you still trying to get Ronnie Rocket going at that point?
After every film, I try to get Ronnie Rocket going.
But when Dino De Laurentiis' production company was bought out, the rights to it were tangled up in red tape, so he never had a chance to move forward with it. While writing another script for Propaganda Films, the manuscript for what would become Wild at Heart was shared with David, with the intention of sealing an executive producer credit on a film adaptation. David Lynch has often said that he doesn't pursue a project unless he falls in love with it, and he so loved the manuscript that he called up the author, Barry Gifford, and asked if if he could direct it himself. And just to link things back up to gaming as frequently as possible, he would go on to co-write a very Lynchian game called Immortality in 2022. More so than some of his films, you can feel that love with the material. There is a certain wildness and passion to the intercourse between film and filmmaker. He was in his horny arc for this one.
Wild at Heart was such an intimate movie that he was usually sitting on the bed while we were doing our love scenes. And
it's the story of Sailor and Lula, a passionate couple that goes on a road trip to escape Lula's domineering mother, her private detective boyfriend, and a hitman she's hired, who she doesn't seem to have a very tight grip on. Her first attempt at having him killed was foiled when Sailor mercilessly smashes the perpetrator's head in. But in the heat of the moment, even though it was self-defense, it didn't really look that way by the end. Cut to 3 years later, and the two pick up right where they left off. Even though he was once again adapting a book, both he and Gifford were more open to taking liberties with it, and so a lot of Lynch's own ideas began to replace bits of the original story, as though he took the premise and lowered it into his idea lake to see what else he got. As a result, the film develops a very unique look and tone. The two leads share this sort of naive, teenage, apocalyptic love for each other, and once they break parole and leave home, they are met with a hostile, confusing, and weird world that tests their resolve. This is brought into a fantastic hyper-reality by way of borrowing imagery from The Wizard of Oz.
You might even picture Toto from The Wizard of Oz.
There's a whole documentary about Lynch and his allusions to The Wizard of Oz, I believe through Criterion. It's probably one of the more superfluous bits of peripheral Lynch media, but probably worth it just to hear John Waters talking about Lynch at length. I know I initially bounced off of Wild at Heart because it did seem like it was uncharacteristically self-aware. But I'm used to a David Lynch film confusing me, making me think, and it's usually because he's showing me something that I've not seen before. For this one, I could swear he was trying to be weird, where I almost laugh out of like, so what were you thinking here, buddy?
Pigeons spread diseases. I must have the you see that.
But I've since come around to it, and I don't entirely think that as much. I afford his films far more chances than just about any director. There are moments that on first viewing can seem like non sequiturs, like just a thing that happened on the road. But it's not difficult to consult the things that Lynch likes to cover and apply them to the mental state of our leads. It can be, in some sense, like much of what he would come to portray in his work, a sort of erosion of fantasy, seeing the world through the lens of a Technicolor musical, where Sailor can just point to a speed metal band and they know it's time for an Elvis number, but that's kind of a screen built to protect them from the horrors of the world and of their past sins or traumas. Lula is pretty much the main character. A lot of the psychological stuff explored is applicable to her, and it could relate to sexuality and particularly a shame or guilt in it. She mentally leaves the stifling and unsexy world behind to some imagined state of ultimate happiness outside the clutches of her cruel and jealous mother, doing everything she can to stamp out the happiness she can never find. Eventually, the fantasy keeps getting invaded by reality.
But was dismayed to learn that Roy had had sex with the corpse.
What?
And she starts seeing that reflected in Sailor as well. Sailor, despite all appearances and nearly everything that comes out of his mouth, is not so much a cartoon person, but he has a cartoon person's idea of masculinity, of what is required to lead a fulfilling life as a man. Participating in a robbery to score them cash makes sense in his worldview, but when he's presented with, say, the opportunity of settling down with Lula and their son, it doesn't fit into what he's built himself into. He's convinced himself that danger is his love language, which he only comes to examine after calling a group of boys the F-slur and then promptly being humbled. His arc is a little more simple. He kind of just needed to get his ass kicked. Having said all that, there is a high probability of Nick Cage the man being a cartoon person for sure, yeah.
No, I gotta give you my Wild at Heart t-shirt.
Make no mistake, beyond all the darkness and weirdness, this is Lynch very earnestly wanting to make a love story, to the point of changing the ending from the book, in which Sailor and Lula break up, to just give them a happy ending. He said, fuck it, if I'm shipping Sailor and Lula, then so are you.
That's just about the cutest thing I've ever seen.
And there are so many David Lynch regulars who pop up like Easter eggs in every scene, but the core memory I have of it was how it barely has a second to establish any kind of tone, and immediately Nick Cage is graphically smashing someone's head into the floor. There's opening credits, establishing shot, smashed head. His love for those characters transcended celluloid, and he wound up naming his youngest daughter Lula. I used to be a big fan of commentary tracks. I mean, I think I still am, but I just don't find myself with the particular amount of time it takes to watch a film's New Game Plus. But I remember listening to this film's commentary with the sole intention of learning why there is a guy walking in the background of this scene with a red pipe, and why this red tubing imagery repeats a few times, even in other films like Mulholland Drive. And despite the Wizard of Oz worship, I think he's attempting to pay respects to a director that he's a big fan of, Jacques Tati, throughout Wild at Heart. Tati made these gorgeous and very visually consistent slapstick comedies that express this exaggerated use of color. For example, in the movie My Uncle, there's a shot of a water fountain, and the water has been colored to be unnaturally blue. It's like a blue that would appear in a cartoon or something. It looks wrong, but right within the world of the movie. And there's almost always a vivid splash of red in each frame, drawing your eyes to it, and often it's in a wiggly tube form. I'd say this same technique is consistent enough in Wild at Heart that it's safe to say he was also attempting to heighten the reality of the thing this way. For a guy with a distinct enough style that it warrants its own term, it's pretty interesting seeing a specific inspiration of his be so pronounced in something he made.
Jacques Tati, if you want to see some great comedies, check out Jacques Tati.
I've heard him bring up Tati a lot in interviews, and have always considered doing a deeper dive into him, but, you know, I hear the French name and my eyes glaze over, and I just wanted to continue that bit from earlier. I flash back to my history of film class and get French PTSD. Les aimants tout pour neuf. But we just did A Bout de Souffle. There was a Shout Factory Blu-ray that has like an hour and 10 minutes of unrestored deleted scenes that all seem kind of logical to be there, as though they were not cut because they changed the context of anything or felt incongruous with the final cut, just that it's what it had to be to get to 2 hours and some change. I mean, being that the movie works without it, it's a lot of filler that may have slowed the pacing of it considerably. For the most part, Lynch knew how to cut things such that you always just know how we got somewhere or, you know, what happened. But some of these cut scenes could have made moments like the pigeon guy feel like at least a fully formed idea. Either way, insane that he seemed to regularly write and film 2 movies worth of movie and then cut them down to 1. The same thing happened with Blue Velvet. The entire sequence with Crispin Glover is so great. That, like, sold me on this movie because it really scratched at my deranged teenage sense of humor.
I'm making my lunch!
People also ask me how much I was directed in that scene. I've never been directed as specifically for something.
And it's a shame more of him didn't wind up in the film, because he did have a slightly more significant role in the original cut, which was apparently very upsetting during test screenings. But it also just feels so natural for him to be there, you know? Like, it just makes sense that Glover would be in a David Lynch movie.
I don't know how much reading he does of actors. I've never did an audition or read for him. It seems like he often talks to people and just sees if there's a sensibility that is something that he can work with.
Some people have this magical, undefinable aura about them that reads as David Lynch film actor. Lula's mother is played by Laura Dern's actual mother, Diane Ladd, and in that same feature they discuss how much of a natural she was working with him. Like, they just fell into sync with the idea and became David Lynch film actor, which is kind of undefinable, but I guess could read like melodramatic or hammy to the point of transcendence and hyper-reality. Like, they're doing a lot, but they are owning it so hard that you do not question whether or not they are this person.
Mama, if you get in the way of me and Sailor's happiness, I'll fucking pull your arms out by the roots!
Even though Wild at Heart would win the Palme d'Or at Cannes, it was seen as an upset. As Lynch sheepishly walked out to accept his award, there is an audible choir of boos.
Say it.
I've been trying to get to the Cannes Film Festival for 20 years. I can't believe what's happening. It's a dream come true. Thank you very much.
A lot of critics were confused by the festival's highest honor being given to a film where Crispin Glover puts bugs down his pants for the purposes of sexual gratification. But outside this film head bubble, the movie seemed to be received pretty much the same way as his other films, at least by our favorite enjoyers of boring films.
David Lynch is a very good director. And I really feel that. I felt that about his next film, Wild at Heart, which I booed when it won the award at the Cannes Film Festival.
Oh, you booed?
Yes,
there?
I booed.
Wow.
That make you feel cool? That make you feel like a big man? Thumb boy? I'll tell you where you can stick that thumb. Up in the air on the side of the road, because I want you out of here. It should never be understated how important and popular Twin Peaks was during its first season. There was truly nothing else like it on TV, and there remains to be not much like it. Every episode of that show contained some element or scene that made me think, I can't believe this was put on television. Nadine gets brain damage-induced super strength? Nobody else is doing this. The show's tendency to become abstract and esoteric at the flip of a switch has never truly been replicated in my eyes. There are plenty of fallback shows where you could say, well, if you appreciate this aspect of Twin Peaks, you might like this. But the strength of that show was not in one singular aspect. It was its characters, its tone, its visuals, its mystery, its darkness, its humor. Lynch often used to say this thing that I found so amusing because it was another alienism of sorts. He'd say he hated one type movies, like genre films, an action movie, or a horror movie. Those are one type, and Twin Peaks carries over this philosophy from his films, where it could starkly change tone and genre at will. At the drop of a hat, the music goes from jaunty, small-town quirky comedy, and then goes low into mystery and confusion. The way music follows these sharp turns is really important. There's this wonderful behind-the-scenes video of the also tragically passed Angelo Badalamenti, who frequently worked with Lynch, and he's recreating the composing of the Twin Peaks score, which was just Lynch shouting out ideas, and he'd follow along.
Once he caught a thing, this great talent of Angelo that pulls your heartstrings, this most beautiful stuff comes out. And many times I'd start crying. It was so beautiful.
And she's getting close. Now reach some kind of climax. And I would go, and he said, oh, that's it. Oh, that's so beautiful. Angelo. Oh, that's tearing my heart out. I love that. Just keep that going.
People are really opinionated about its second season, which was fraught with difficulties. It's usually the subject of an elongated asterisk when you're trying to pitch someone on watching it. By the way, early on the show's central mystery is solved and the show seems to be wandering in an effort to find other plot points, but I think that was always meant to happen. It was always meant to drift around and find new dark corners of Twin Peaks to shine a flashlight onto. But for one, a lot of people, including the studio, underestimated how load-bearing the murder of Laura Palmer was to the plot, even as a passive background element. But certainly a bigger concern was David Lynch and Mark Frost not seeing eye to eye on the series for a while. In season 1, the show's writers were initially given rather strict outlines by the two, and only allowed to improvise if it got the go-ahead from both. This was not the case after Laura's mystery was solved. Needing a hook, the writers wanted to pivot to bolstering a romance arc between the stalwart FBI agent Dale Cooper and inquisitive high schooler Audrey Horne that Kyle MacLachlan strongly objected to, and Sherilyn Fenn strongly supported, requiring several rough alterations. By the time Lynch returned to direct the final episode of that season, the show had deviated so far from the plan that he ignored a lot of the finale script and instead went with creating one of the best episodes of TV ever. Unfortunately, by then, the network felt the show was too expensive to produce and was not getting the same ratings as season 1.
But I have to believe that you're the kind of person that if this does not turn out the way you would like it to turn out, that you have several other projects right now that you're in the middle of, don't you?
I do. I'm going to finally be able to do this film I've been trying to do called Ronnie Rocket.
Ronnie Rocket now?
Ronnie Rocket.
But they came up with a $75 million contract to have Lynch and Frost conclude the series with a film trilogy. Frost wanted a direct sequel to the finale of season 2, using material that had been dreamt up for a third season that never was. Lynch was unshakable on wanting to make the first film a prequel, and so Frost left him to that project alone. It's a tragic scenario in which both were right and yet both wronged. Yes, the fact that the film was a prequel that did not address the show's insane conclusion was a big turnoff to normies and led to the film being a big enough box office failure that the 2 planned sequels were scrapped. But it did also result in maybe the most haunting and beautiful thing Lynch ever created, centered around a fearless and intense performance from the show's cast. Both sort of knew what they were talking about, and in a perfect world where dreams don't get extinguished by a besuited dork snapping their fingers, we could have witnessed unprecedented greatness. Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me can be a tough watch. The TV show has this earnest, wholesome veneer atop its darkness, but the limits of what can be shown on television allowed that veneer to occasionally obscure how gruesome and tragic what is actually taking place in that series is. The film jumps back to these moments that are only gently referred to and now just show you them, and it's effectively jarring. At first it's like, whoa, wait a minute, this is grim and awful, and then you're like, well, I guess I didn't know that all this happened in some sense.
I plan on writing an epic poem about this gorgeous pie.
Certainly, there is a beauty to taking this character who is dead throughout the entire show, but who is always present and felt and actively affecting the characters and actually letting us experience how complex and broken she was.
It just was a shame that she had to be dead. And one thing led to another, and she's lived on.
It makes the way people felt about her seem all the more genuine and real. By seeing them interact with her alive, some characters feel almost redeemed, and others look more like fucking idiots. In the opening of the first episode, when everyone breaks down crying and it seems like everyone's maybe overdoing it, you can believe that this would be the reaction. In that most of the adults think, how could this beautiful angel that delivered food to the needy and was polite and sweet be so cruelly murdered? And the younger characters that had been friends with her, in love with her, or manipulated by her aren't as surprised, but are grief-stricken that they couldn't or didn't help her.
All you good people. You want to know who killed Laura? You did! We all did.
I can't, and honestly don't want to dwell on what 2 more of these could have looked like. As it stands, it's not even so much that there are things I want to know more about, just things I want to spend more time with. The first act of Fire Walk With Me doesn't even take place in Twin Peaks, the town, but surrounding areas as 2 different FBI agents investigate the death of Teresa Banks. And I remember finding it fascinating seeing other locations outside of the town, and how they were all similarly quirky and strange in their own way, as if there were a whole galaxy of Twin Peakses, and the town we've come to know is just at its center. You spend enough time with these well-defined characters that I easily could have just sat through a film about them, but eventually, one of them, Chester Desmond, played by the singer Chris Isaak, finds the mysterious ring that shows up in many places throughout the franchise, and disappears completely, likely sucked into one of the strange places beyond time and space. This leads to Cooper picking up the case and going to Twin Peaks himself, and the rest of the movie plays out sort of episodically as it counts down the days to Laura's death. As to be expected, there was a lot that Lynch had to cut from the movie to make that 2-hour and 16-minute runtime. Enough material that it's longer than many films. Twin Peaks Missing Pieces is a sort of pseudo-film that came about later that strings the deleted scenes together, collecting snapshots of what other characters from the show were up to in the lead up to Laura's death. I have mixed feelings not about the content of missing pieces, but in the way they are presented. I've listened to the guy speak enough such that I'm sure he doesn't think of deleted scenes in the same way the viewer does.
Quite often, when we are talking about beauty, we are talking about wood. Thank you very much.
It's not like the studio made me get rid of this part I liked. It's more like the piece isn't done until it's done, and when it's cut to the time I get is when it's done. There's no dreaming of a director's cut where he got what he really wanted it to be. He had final cut. It is the singular offering we got. That is the work, specified to his vision, which included or made room for things he might not be able to include. As a fan of the guy's output, I can understand the impulse to want to put those back where it seemed like they went. And as a former film head, I can understand feeling that to be a disingenuous way of absorbing an art, going against what the artist wanted to present. In a sense saying, I think you were wrong about this thing you made, and really it should look like this. I think feelings are stronger on that front when it comes to Lynch, because he so often spoke about the importance of having final cut, and the difficulties of trying to create what he wanted in a space that was hostile to his type. I've been around Lynch fans long enough to have withstood several essay-length posts about how re-editing Fire Walk with Me is like breaking into a crypt with a sledgehammer and desecrating a grave, just like a deeply personal injustice. I'm aware that he wouldn't want the supercut, and I'm aware that I do, and ain't no law says I can't drag it into Windows Movie Maker. Oh, well, there might be, actually. The other thing that pushes me towards a 3.5-hour supercut is that part of the deleted scenes is an unmanipulated version of David Bowie's scene, which, untouched by the jarring editing, is one of my favorite things Lynch has directed, and something that deeply affected my own creative thinking, I think. And to me, the version they went with in the original really hurts the power of that. If I may criticize one single fucking thing, please. If I may spit in the eye of a Kino deity briefly, in my opinion, the treatment of that one scene in that one film was a little bit inelegant. In an otherwise beautifully constructed film, it just felt like a cold breeze.
Oh, Mr. Jeffries! Oh, the shit that come out of my ass.
So certainly prioritize watching the original. It's maybe the best thing he made. But after that, do what makes you happy and just don't tell the FBI. And don't clip that out of context. To return to the TV series for a second, Twin Peaks was another thing that you could describe in conversation as Lynch's most accessible work, mostly because there were many other minds working on it. Lynch and Frost were sort of the administrators of it, but TV shows require several writers, directors, and creative minds to function as they do, or did. But it was still a challenging show, and its fate is reflective of how much people resisted letting it cook. There are a lot of people that choose to fight against this sort of art, despite it resonating so much with other creators. I'm a big fan of the show Lost. It was one of the first long-form mystery series that I got into, and I watched it before watching Twin Peaks. Despite being a fan of David's work, the prospect of starting a series and potentially falling in love with it only to meet a hard cutoff due to its cancellation didn't sound like something I had the heart for. But post-Lost, I needed something else, and the consensus online was a resounding, just watch Twin Peaks. So when I finally got around to watching it, I was just like, so many things I've come across in life make sense now. This is the fucking Rosetta Stone for serialized television. Like, not actually, but kind of actually. The water cooler mystery of Twin Peaks leading to the Reddit megathread mystery of Lost. I think Lost is a pretty good analog for the experience of watching Twin Peaks live. Certainly the best that I'll live to see, what with the way TV is headed. That is to say, southward, if you will. Downstairs, if I may. Lost was ABC's next massively popular mystery series and was given markedly different treatment than Twin Peaks. Oh, make no mistake, the network did not learn some kind of lesson from the rapid decline and cancellation of Twin Peaks.
So if you look at Twin Peaks, for example, which is my favorite show of all time, Twin Peaks, which is one of the shows that really inspired me and is now back on, that it was a cautionary tale, and the thinking was it resolved its central mystery and then nobody cared anymore. So Lost basically took the approach of, well, what if there's 8,000 mysteries? And if we can just get people to care about any 5 of them, they'll keep watching the show.
There isn't a whole lot content-wise that Lost and Twin Peaks share aside from some nods from the former to the latter, and in having a vaguely spiritual, vaguely sci-fi mythology that serves as a stage to place complex or idiosyncratic characters.
She's filled with features.
Hello, who's there?
But it's their place in the annals of TV history that has remarkable similarities. Twin Peaks sort of elevated the soap opera with surreal dreamy stuff and dark violent themes, and Lost brought a cinematic quality and frankly budget that was unheard of at the time. It was a confident step forward in blurring the line between series and film. ABC actually rejected the pilot episode of Lost on the grounds that it looked like it could wind up being another Twin Peaks. It looked like the sort of thing that they would just love to set up for failure and watch burn. For 48 hours, the cast was under the impression that they needed to find new jobs. But once it tested well and they decided to move forward with it, ABC almost inverted their reaction to Twin Peaks, or rather pulled the lever in the polar opposite direction to many of the same pitfalls. One of the most annoying things, as a Lost fan, I'd hear from those who bounced off of the show, was something to the effect of, oh, they're just making it up as they go, or they don't have a plan, so why would I set myself up for disappointment? Which to some degree is true for both series, and nearly all series except for some that are based on books, and then also some that are based on books. Twin Peaks was a very fluid series that would often make huge changes on a whim. The extra-dimensional being that serves as the series' main antagonist was invented by complete accident. Lynch essentially noticed that a set decorator named Frank Silva was visible in the mirror of a take and rolled with it. It was an error that would ordinarily constitute another take, but he was like, it's perfect. I love that. Similarly, the line of dialogue that would serve as Lynch and Frost's impetus, their entryway to creating the return at all, was something Lynch wrote the night before filming that episode, with no belief that it would see a payoff. The idea told him to do it.
I'll see you again in 25 years. Meanwhile,
similarly, the first season of Lost was written with numerous TBD asterisks. Its lead character was supposed to die in the pilot episode, but didn't, and a new character was simply invented during auditions because they really liked one of the actors. Its co-creator, J.J. Abrams, would essentially read the scripts that Damon Lindelof wrote and add, okay, but then they find like a metal hatch in the ground, or, and then they get chased by a monster, without a clue as to how these things would socket together. Lindelof was told, you'll figure it out, while JJ went back to working on Alias. And so in between seasons 1 and 2, they figured it out. Unfortunately, what they figured out was a tightly planned 3-season story arc, and ABC had no intention of literally ever stopping the show. Lindelof and later co-writer Carlton Cuse would pretty much from the tail end of season 1 routinely lobby to be given an end date for the show, so they could start implementing the plan. ABC, unsurprisingly, didn't want to budge on this, assuming the entire purpose of this discussion was to get more money out of them. But it was literally because there was no way to keep the show spinning plates for so long. Eventually, the audience is going to get frustrated that nobody got off this fucking island. How many times can we flash back to Jack being a self-destructive train wreck? This did start to manifest in mid-season 3, which could be described as the filler arc. After seeing the show finally begin to stumble.
So they took us out to breakfast and said, we have agreed to let you end the show. And we were like, yes. And they were like, after 10 years.
ABC was talked down from 10 seasons to 6 seasons with fewer episodes. The point is, even with a plan, plans change, and not always because you have an unconventional, mercurial creator at the helm. As Twin Peaks experienced, there are numerous ways the plan can change that are out of your hands. Maybe you write a whole story arc and then a guy central to that is like, nah, I don't want to do that. Which Lost did also experience in its second season. They introduced this fascinating character that would sort of bridge the show's spirituality with its hard sci-fi turn. And then that guy was like, fellas, I fucking hate Hawaii, and I know we have a contract to do this whole season, but aloha, sue me. So again, the plan wasn't working, so you changed the plan. I don't say this to imply that neither show made mistakes. Twin Peaks has the James side quest that everyone seems to hate, but me. I would watch a whole series about James riding through the country, lonely mobster wives. I'd fight for scraps of Twin Peaks atmosphere. Would you? Lost has a whole episode devoted to giving an in-world explanation for Matthew Fox's actual tattoo, and I'm gonna be real. I can say the same. I'd watch a whole show about Matthew Fox trying to Eileen. If there is one failing that I recognize in Lost, it's that while Twin Peaks caved to network pressure, Lost caved to fan pressure several times over, throwing a bone to the loudest wedge of its audience and explaining something that was a lot cooler when it didn't have an explanation. I guess it worked out that mysteries had a Hydra-like functionality by design in that show. Anyways, it just seems indicative of how audiences and networks were hostile to doing anything truly artful with television, turning it into a game where the goal is to predict what will happen next, out loud while the show is on, and then clap should you guess correctly, as though there were a score screen in which you can input your name as come.
Well, this means that everything's different, doesn't it? I mean, television's going to be just this wonderful cornucopia of incredible variety and richness now. And I said, no, it's going to be exactly the way it was, because it's not there to really be creative in its express form. It's there to sell advertising time.
It shows how much of a miracle it is when any of these things resonate with people, enough to ripple outward and inspire others to enter the same horrid business. Bright-eyed, quirky, blonde of hair, Canadian, and gay. Maybe it's that impulse to gamify that so attracts gamers to Twin Peaks. One of the first video games to openly name Lynch, and specifically Twin Peaks as a reference point, was the handheld title Zelda Link's Awakening, which for years was only theorized as tapping into a Lynchian energy due to its small town full of quirky characters with dark secrets. In the years since, the game's director, Takashi Tezuka, has admitted that he wanted whatever they were smoking in Twin Peaks, or eating.
Wheels up.
And more recently, Mark Frost has had some dormant memory of actually speaking with the dev team and offering some ideas on how to do that awaken. Not unlike Link! Just a year later, 1995's Earthbound would be released in Japan, another game with noteworthy admiration for Twin Peaks, presenting a sort of surreal parody of American culture, complete with a creepy inverted world you enter through a bar. I'm not sure what it is, but game developers have always been drawn to gamify the work of Lynch. And you know, there is usually an investigative element and a horror element or psychological element. It asks for your participation even without a controller in your hand. And in many, we see some variation of a journey. His protagonists stumble through thin membranes separating other worlds, ones that aren't separated by galaxies, but common liminal spaces and orifices, hallways, boxes, even an ear. Proving how ideas can come at you from the smallest, strangest places, the origin of Lost Highway was its name. Lynch had read the phrase in a book by Barry Gifford called Night People, and the two began writing in service to that.
I think I said, I have an idea, a little idea about something or other, and he said, oh, I kind of like that. And one thing led to another, and there was Lost Highway.
What they came up with was an examination of a character experiencing a sort of break from reality. It plays around with familiar topics like dreams, duality, identity, but with an almost uncharacteristically linear purpose. For whatever reason, of all his movies, I most feel the structure of beginning, middle, and end with this one, even though it is maybe a little more steeped in abstraction. For the first third of it, it's functionally a modern horror thriller of sorts, complete with pretty effective jump scares. I mean, modern for the time. The tech of the mid-90s is given a spotlight pretty consistently, including consumer-grade video and its potential for eeriness, which Lynch would later go on to experiment with further in his film Inland Empire. Lost Highway follows Bill Pullman's character Fred, a sax player living in West Hollywood with his wife, Renee, played by Patricia Arquette, Fred begins having ominous dreams where reality is distorted and there is a palpable mistrust and tension between the two, from scene 1. And then the two begin finding videotapes left at their doorstep from the perspective of someone first outside their home and then inside watching over them. They report it to the police, who of course have very little to go off of. I love this whole sequence though, because it's so tense and uncomfortable. Like they are just going through the motions of checking the house for signs of forced entry, taking a look around, but like none of this is reassuring. The prevailing feeling is just like an impotence, and that they're getting like a bad vibe off of Fred. And this is followed up with my favorite sequence of his next to the entire FBI headquarters scene in Fire Walk With Me, where essentially a guy he's seen in his nightmares, the mystery man, as David calls him, approaches him at a party, and all the ambience and music drops out like this dude's supernatural presence absorbed it all.
Where was it you think we met?
At your house, don't you remember?
He races back home with Renee to find his house still empty and nothing out of place. The next morning, he finds another tape, but this time, he's on camera dismembering his wife. Anything after that is like, you tell me, man. I got my answer, but I'm not in the business of explaining Lynch with any measure of authority or confidence.
The story, I suppose, is a metaphor for these times in which people don't know who they are and are affected mostly by violence. That's the only interpretation I can come up with. David Lynch is a most creative filmmaker, has a fine visual sense, employs great musical scores, but I don't think Lost Highway adds up to much, and therefore its considerable violence really turned me off.
Boy, I feel just about the same way.
You fuckhead. That is the stupidest thing you interpreted there.
But there are so many things I love about the construction of this one beyond its circular narrative where it ends the dream by starting it, where the psychotic fugue state of Fred is seemingly just also happening in some sense. Like outside, affecting other characters? I don't know. In a sequence that could easily be inserted into The Return, Fred is just replaced by a new guy named Pete. It's a certified Blue Rose moment. And there is plenty of ways one could see this. It could be a time thing, a mind thing, a dream thing, a real thing. I mean, there are plenty of side and incidental characters that are reacting to the fact that a death row inmate disappeared and was replaced by literally a random guy. Is this happening, or is this an extension of a dream? Has he been dreaming since scene 1? Is this an elaborate screen memory Fred has constructed, dreaming himself into another guy that didn't kill his wife, and instead has the chance to save her from some peril, but even that fantasy starts crumbling away? As an adult, I can better see the thread of insecurity and demasculinization, tying it together. It's like once you pick up on one aspect of it, it's easy to snowball into a take and read like the whole middle section of the movie as a deteriorating form of wish fulfillment. The first sex scene is really key because it's so clear that the chemistry is off between them and that he was giving his saxophone more passion earlier.
Sax guys, sex guys, sex gods.
According to Lynch, Bill Pullman did actually learn the abstract jazz piece he performs, which is pretty insane, given how easy it would have been to fake and probably was anyway due to sound issues. Renee gives him, to borrow a Seinfeld term, the tap, which looks to be humiliating for him. And I think this is the moment of sexual inadequacy that brings him to snap. The framing of that scene is also really stark and mechanical, like one of the transitions in The Elephant Man. And it is with great purpose, because if you watch any of the sex scenes between Sailor and Lula in Wild at Heart, that is very clearly what Lynch wanted to present as genuinely passionate and loving. And it's so effective, or graphic enough at least, that I probably shouldn't show it. Not to say that it's just a sexual thing in Lost Highway. Judging by the scenario he dreams up for himself, there was a wider desire to be desired, in a cartoony 1950s noir sense. It's not a stale marriage, it's a dangerous and exhilarating affair, and she's willing to risk the wrath of her mobster lover just to keep hooking up with him. Pete only swaps back to Fred after the alternate version of Renee tells him that he'll never have her. But even with this take, there are plenty of elements that don't quite socket into place, leftover screws that seem important, but it's too late for me to do anything with them. I don't know, which is a wonderful place to be. In interviews, Lynch has referenced that during the creation of Lost Highway, he was very, very interested in the O.J. Simpson trial, and he wondered how the mind would protect you or deal with the knowledge that you had done something so evil. And I think that's pretty telling, and an intriguing but not exact or precise way of reading Lost Highway. I remember this being a huge factor for respecting Silent Hill 2 when I first played it. I'm sure there was a wealth of influences for that game, but I specifically remember thinking, these fuckers watched Lost Highway and Blue Velvet. You have this spacey, disassociated lead who starts doubting what's real and what's delusion.
Do I look like your girlfriend?
No, my late wife. I can't believe it. You could be her twin. Your face, your voice, just your hair and clothes are different.
And even in his idealized version, he fails to hold on to her, creating this self-flagellatory nightmare.
Anyway! What do you mean, anyway? You don't sound very happy to see me. I was almost killed back there. Why didn't you try to save me? All you care about is that dead wife of yours.
The mystery man could be Fred's pyramid head. This is stupid. I would have prefaced this by saying this is stupid. He's a manifestation of his sexual inadequacy that haunts him, following him around with cameras, the things he hates.
Do you want a video camera?
No. Fred hates them.
Forcing him to confront the reality of his weak stroke game, to further reinforce that what the mystery man reflects is the world as everyone sees it, and not just Fred's world. His video camera isn't even like a functional home video camera. He did not buy that at Circuit City. It's some kind of modified surveillance camera with a viewfinder screwed to the bottom of it. An insecurity camera, if you will. Oh, I'm sorry, I assumed you'd be clapping.
I like to remember things my own way.
What do you mean by that?
Of course, there is the grim reality that he's hidden away from himself that is revealed through a VHS tape. To say nothing of the score! I usually pick up on new things with each rewatch of Lost Highway that add to a previously held theory or damage it sometimes. This time around, I really honed in on this micro moment when Renee picks up the first videotape. Every interaction between Fred and Renee, including their sex scene, feels distant and uneasy, but particularly her reluctance to show him the tape I found interesting. In her body language, you can see her thinking about hiding it before just handing it over.
They have a very dishonest relationship. I mean, I think she's in a way very fearful of him. She doesn't know what he's really capable of. He doesn't want to admit who he really is.
And then later, when Fred is Pete, Mr. Eddie offers Pete a porno tape that is also just an unlabeled, nondescript tape.
You like pornos? Pornos. Give you a boner?
Alice, the other version of Renee, has done porn, and this could be mirrored in Renee, but it would also be effective if she hadn't, and it's just a jealousy and misogyny-fueled delusion.
He told me about a job.
What job?
I don't remember.
In rewatching it now, I think it makes sense that Fred has his first confrontation with this monster he dreamt up for himself at this party with a bunch of figures from Renee's past. He's got to be reaching peak insecurity, and initially I had assumed the fact that everyone's jumping into the pool naked was to imply this was a porn industry party entirely, like everyone here is linked to Renee's old job. But the making of feature reveals that Lynch was maybe just being compelled to do this by the idea. The idea took the lead here.
You've got girls here that professional strippers that are already paid to be, exposed, so that we can have some pretty racy stuff going on if you think that's appropriate.
It's also just really impressive that they got a real murderer to play this guy.
The ears and the strangeness and all that. And he said, that's lovely. You won't have to act at all. I said, you're right.
Also, while intentionally trying to dream up an obnoxious, explained actually type factoid, I was thinking, so are the two detectives that follow Pete around meant to be the audience? That is just tailing along, observing, offering meta commentary, and working to make heads or tails of what's going on?
Fucker gets more pussy than a toilet seat.
Are they our impulse to apply logic to things that don't ask for it? A lot of things that feel meaningful and important in Lynch's work are just things he wanted to create. Exact snapshots of memory, which, as the movie posits, are not the same as a video. The thing informing the framing loop, hearing and saying, Dick Laurent is dead, into an intercom is apparently just a thing that happened to David, like that exact name. And like Fred, he couldn't see down to who was standing at the intercom, and by the time he got downstairs, nobody was there. So like the entire motif here is once again meant to precisely recreate something from his life that left some impression of mystery or wonder. It's also the willingness to just roll with this as a thing that happened that I always found fascinating. Like, how would the prison, the police, Pete's parents all react to this event that nobody can offer a satisfactory explanation for? That was much the same thing that drew me to The Leftovers, which was certainly Lynchian in many ways. It takes place in a world where in a single moment, millions of people at random are just missing now, and you'll never know why or how, or understand the mechanics of it to any degree.
The Pope, I get the Pope. But Gary fucking Busey? How does he make the cut?
Ours is not the reason why, Mike.
And then examine people affected by it, like little bugs in a jar. Watch them attempt to cope, form support groups or cults, or more commonly head down self-destructive paths. Speaking of Pete's parents, this has to be the most brave and transformative role for Gary Busey, who somehow manages to portray a normal dad. I like how sparsely decorated Fred and Pete's homes are, so when there are tense moments in the darkness, every hallway or turn just looks like an infinite void. A lot of Lynch standards make an appearance, like red curtains, white picket fences, 50s Americana, psychotic gangsters. Interestingly, David Lynch had up till now been inspiring other creators in a medium he was likely not aware of, especially in Japan, where Twin Peaks was hugely popular.
Man, oh man, this Georgia is damn fine coffee.
It's true.
What about this deer head? Notice the symbol, Ken. I think you and I should take a drive. Big Ed's Gas Farm, Georgia.
Early games like Link's Awakening and the original Persona openly pulled from his bag of tricks, but none so liberally and transparently as Mizurna Falls, which would release the same year in Japan only, and to a near lawsuit-worthy degree thrust you into a janky small-town murder investigation, carving up moments from Twin Peaks and Blue Velvet and changing some names around. But this year would also contain, unless I'm mistaken, the first instance of Lynch having some awareness of video games as a potential creative realm to explore. There were a smattering of vague reports that David Lynch had planned to team up with Japanese developer Synergy Inc. Somehow, he had come across the 1993 game Gadget, Invention, Travel, and Adventure, and was impressed by the possibilities of the technology and its immersive qualities. And of course, Lynch's introduction to video games would be an obscure Japanese retro-futuristic point-and-click adventure game. That game's director, Haruhiko Shono, would later admit through an email exchange with The Verge that Gadget was hugely inspired by Lynch's work, specifically on Dune, as much of the world was designed with his vision of that story in mind. The proposed game, to be titled Woodcutters on Fiery Ships, was, according to him, immediately rejected, and he was told that it would be too boring for the modern gamer, which is a wild thing for the creators of an interactive museum to say. Also, this happened after they had announced the partnership, and wheels seemed to be moving pretty officially, so I have to imagine that it was more so the case that they were falling apart as a company, seeing as though they didn't even release the only project they were working on at the time, and they only managed to get out a port of Gadget before crumbling. Even weirder, the Japanese press ran this story as Lynch's game being probably a sequel to Twin Peaks, based on nothing. I struggle to think of a situation where there would be more crossed wires than a Japanese game developer trying to make an interactive movie with an American alien. In true Lynchian fashion, what does David follow up his most graphically violent and erotically charged film yet with? A literal G-rated Disney movie, the subject matter of which taking on new, cruel significance as it concerns the disease that would play a role in Lynch's death. This was based on a real-life story, and a script that was not written by him, but his longtime editor and eventual wife and eventual ex-wife, Mary Sweeney. Aside from George Miller going from Happy Feet 2 to Mad Max Fury Road, a more jarring whiplash between projects does not come to mind. It follows a man in his late 70s named Alvin Straight, who is going blind, needs 2 canes to stand, and is showing signs of emphysema and diabetes. And after hearing that his brother in Wisconsin suffered a stroke, he devises a way to visit him without the ability to drive. He welds a trailer to a riding lawnmower and goes on an incredibly slow road trip. I've come across that old quote of Lynch's that I think circulates a lot about this being his most experimental film. And it is kind of funny considering his filmography and how much it seems to pull from German expressionism and realms of film that one would actually think of as experimental. But I think it's more so in reference to being shot chronologically along a real path that someone took, so that time and seasons are visibly passing, and it is directorially a skill set that he hadn't explored. Not so much the absence of violence or sex, but the small cast and quiet sentimentality of Straight's story calls for a lot of slow conversations that have to work, and if they don't, you don't have a movie. There are choices in shots and casting that feel like Lynch. Everett McGill and Henry Dean Stanton show up. One of my favorite bits is Alvin buying the hardware store owner's grabber, and he milks the hardship of selling it for what seems like forever, and it felt distinctly Twin Peaks.
Oh, geez, Alvin. That's my grabber, Alvin.
Well?
But it seems like he really wanted to do right by the script and render the heart of that as one-to-one as possible. And I mean, I think it's a success, for sure. It's a very, very bittersweet movie. We get some insight into why he is so stubbornly set on making this trip his way, taking the path of most resistance through Alvin's interactions with a series of characters like a pregnant runaway, some cyclists, and a woman who's hit a deer with her car. A scene that feels lifted from a John Waters film.
I've tried everything a person could do, and still, every week, I plow into at least one deer!
It becomes clear that this whole journey is in part an act of atonement for mistreating his brother, and that they haven't spoken in 10 years. This is him making the effort, and making it clear that he's willing to swallow his pride and ask for forgiveness. And yeah, it might have come off as less genuine if he just took a Greyhound and made no attempt to change himself. And it's simply and beautifully expressed in the end, where there isn't some sappy babbling and swelling music. His brother just gets it, and they know that something has been repaired almost wordlessly.
Did you ride that thing all the way out here to see me? I did, Lyle.
Lynch has often said that he never wanted to be a director, he just wanted to make films. And I get what he means because there is a difference there. But I think the Straight story shows that he instinctively can be a versatile director that can do something out of his wheelhouse, like a genre piece, faithfully, provided he's fallen in love with the story. Not to refer to this as a one-type movie, but even though it's a very straightforward movie with a specific thing and character type being examined, he finds places to experiment and small things to examine. None of these are very video gamey unless someone makes a narrative-driven lawn-mowing sim. Though in between this film and the next, he would create, I believe, the last thing he had a personal hand in that was even tangentially related to video games, a TV commercial for PlayStation 2. He did a lot of TV commercials and was always up for that work because they paid well and usually let him use some state-of-the-art technology. But this one stands out because it seems like Sony instructed him to make something that would have people think, that reminds me of David Lynch, even to the point of making it black and white when he didn't want it to be black and white.
That's good, Dave. Okay. Fire! Okay. This is so fucking beautiful.
Around 1993, after Twin Peaks was not picked up for a new season, Lynch and Frost began briefly brainstorming the idea of a spin-off series that revealed the fate of Audrey Horne, following her possible demise when the bank exploded, and it would see her starting over in Hollywood, getting herself mixed up in all manner of neo-noir adventures. Ultimately, feedback from the network made it clear that the association with the now-cancelled show would be a death sentence for the new one. So it was shelved for 6 years. The failure to get Twin Peaks renewed for a third season and his sitcom, on the air more than 7 episodes, was so disheartening that Lynch vowed to never work in television again, writing it into a piece of wood to lock it in like his own personal commandments. Tony Krantz, the same agent that worked with ABC to get Twin Peaks produced, encouraged Lynch to give it one more go. I tend to read Mulholland Drive as the natural continuation of the creative process of Lost Highway, and could be interpreted in much the same way. I'm gonna sneeze. I mean, Lynch was always just following the ideas, but Straight Story wasn't wholly his ideas. And as the title Lost Highway began the stream of ideas, Mulholland Drive's ideas began with the visual of car headlights momentarily illuminating the sign for the actual street in Hollywood. This was the beginning of the string of pearls that made it take shape. I believe by the time Lynch began adapting it into this new project, it had already been severed from Twin Peaks continuity, and Audrey was replaced with a new character. The pilot episode, which Lynch hated, was essentially the plot of the film with some missing threads and characters, and the ending, of course, concluding with a cliffhanger about an hour in. It carried with it a lot of similar hooks and atmosphere as Twin Peaks, but instead of the wholesome veneer of a small northwestern town hiding in esoteric darkness, it's the romanticized and glamorous world of Hollywood show business hiding in esoteric darkness. As Twin Peaks drew in the audience with the maybe never to be answered question, who killed Laura Palmer, this proposed series would ask the question, never to be answered, who is Rita? There's a particularly brutal interview with Movie Line in which a journalist goes to David Lynch's house to ask him about the Straight Story and his upcoming projects. And as he's setting up for the interview, Lynch gets the call that ABC declined to move forward with the series, offering a laundry list of notes as to why, at the top of which was that it was too weird, and the leads, Naomi Watts and Laura Herring, were too old, at 31 and 34 respectively. But the interviewer remarks how genuinely defeated he looks, and Lynch expresses sadness, particularly for the cast because they're good people. When he's told that Watts and Herring have shown a near religious respect for him, he says just about the most lucid thing I've heard him say, "Yeah, well, that's a problem. The chicks really go for me, and there's nothing I can do about it." Tragically, this interview concludes with him being asked what he loves about LA so much, to which he says, "The light and the optimism." There was a year in between of Mulholland Drive simply being a failed pilot, but he eventually received funding to film new material that would close it off as a feature film. I feel like he had to field more questions than usual about the production of this film and restate his artistic fatalism that things want to be a certain way from the beginning. So it's pointless quibbling about discarded ideas or alternate worlds where complications never cause the film to change course. In the end, Mulholland Drive became the film that it is and was always meant to become. The film follows Betty, a bright-eyed and a bit naive Canadian who just arrived in LA to try and make it in the film business. Her life quickly intersects with a woman who is suffering from amnesia following a car accident. She sort of stumbles into the house that Betty is meant to stay in a daze and decides to name herself Rita in the meantime. When they attempt to go through her belongings for a clue to her identity, they find thousands of dollars in bands and a mysterious blue key. It's actually so easy to envision this being a long-running Y2K era Twin Peaks successor. Like, all the fucking pieces were there. In between this mystery playing out, there are scenes that feel almost like entirely disconnected vignettes, including maybe my second or third favorite thing Lynch created, the man behind Winky's sequence, which is just a man describing a reoccurring nightmare he's been having, and to put his mind at ease, he wants to go behind the Winkies and prove to himself that there isn't anything back there. bad news. But the second biggest plot thread follows Justin Theroux's character, Adam. He's a successful director with a bit of an arrogant streak, but throughout the course of the movie, he is put through the ringer. Some shady mobster types waltz into the studio where he's shooting his new movie and threaten to pull funding on the film if he doesn't cast a specific unknown actress as the lead. He also finds out his wife is cheating on him with Billy Ray Cyrus. He's curiously the only character that feels not so much that he's not in a David Lynch film, but that he's not in a dream. He's not taking the surreal turns the movie makes at face value. He's consistently vocally confused by how fucking weird everything is.
Man's attitude goes some ways, the way his life will be. Is that something you might agree with?
Sure.
Lynch has several times over said that Adam is not meant to be a reflection of himself in any sense, but he is writing what he knows to some degree, which is the death one feels giving up creative control. He of all people would know that having that happen might make you want to bash the responsible party's car in with a golf club. In many ways, just by virtue of being so bleak and set in Hollywood, it simply reads like a condemnation of the whole business. I'd say it's around an hour and a half in that you may feel your grasp of the plot start to trickle between your fingers, like a fine dust. What felt like a mildly surreal mystery premise soon becomes steeped in abstraction, as once again two characters are sort of replaced by two new ones, this time played by the same actors. In Lost Highway, Fred becomes Pete after this bizarre blue strobing light shows up, and I think that carries over in some sense to Mulholland Drive. Maybe not indicating the same thing, but showing that something is changing significantly, by means supernatural or psychological. An unnatural event is taking place. Betty is no longer Betty, but Diane, a character that she found dead in her apartment when she was Betty. And Rita is now Camilla, the unknown that Adam was strong-armed into making the lead of his film. Again, I don't feel it's the same mechanics as Lost Highway, but I feel a similar through line of guilt and sexual frustration and attempting to rewrite yourself as separate or better than yourself, to dream it away. If I didn't know better, I'd swear there's almost an inside joke concerning Lynch's preoccupation with dreams when Betty excitedly exclaims,
I mean, I just came here from Deep River, Ontario, and now I'm in this dream place.
It seems like the movie is doing everything it can to imply that it's partly an illusion. There's this great shot that, without looking, I would be shocked if it wasn't brought up in some kind of video essay or analysis of the film, but it goes like this. We cut to the set of the film that Adam is casting for, and we see this 50s era band performing, and the camera pulls out a little more and you see they are inside a recording booth, and for a brief moment you're sold on the fact that you're looking at a song being recorded, but it pulls out even further past the controls and you see there was another layer of artifice and that the booth and mixer are on a movie set that is itself sitting in a lot with other filmmaking shit happening behind it. Now, there's a chance that this was meant to reinforce that part of the story you're watching is manufactured by another character, by a dreamer, but I could never prove to you that this is true. And it's honestly more likely that Lynch just thought it looked nice. There's even this extended shot of Betty showing up to the audition for Adam's movie and locking eyes with him, as though in a Hollywood folktale, in a perfect world, he would shut everything down and say, "Who is that?" And she'd knock it out of the park. But it's not a perfect world, just an idealized one that made sense, that wasn't embarrassing or cruel. I feel less confident throwing out fully formed theories on this one, but I can say that the majority of the ones I come up with are all pretty grim. There is a certain cruelty to the final act of Mulholland Drive that is easy to empathize with and feel the sting of, especially since there is such a sweet romance that develops between Betty and Rita, and then seeing the two playing different characters that are bitterly separated is kind of heartbreaking. Watts is given a very demanding role, having to portray two characters that are on polar opposites of the Hollywood lifestyle. One that is plucky, talented, loving, and has a bright future ahead of her, and another that has already been run through the shredder that is the business and come out the other side lonely, desperate, and broken. Fred may have reimagined his wife as someone that needed him with every fiber of her being and would carry out a fiery, passionate love affair with him. And perhaps Diane reimagined herself as a promising actress that wows the elite and where the only explanation for her not getting the role was an elaborate esoteric conspiracy from the ghouls ghouls living beneath Hollywood, and Camilla is reimagined as an amnesiac that had to rely on her for everything, when in reality she found success over Diane by sleeping her way to the top and ultimately becoming engaged to the director, which is already enough of a knife in the gut for Diane, but Camilla still kisses another woman in front of her intentionally, like as if to say, by the way, I am still gay. I'm just willing to do what you won't, or something like that, I think. Or maybe it was like, I never was gay. I was just also using you to get here. Look how I wrap this rando around my finger. I present only these two options because, look, Lynch came up in the 1950s. I'm not sure he knew bi people existed. Both pieces make a point to end with an echo of how they started, giving the first half meaning or significance through an alternate version. After Camilla sufficiently humiliates and crushes her dreams of being together again, Diane hires the hitman, played by Mark Pellegrino, who in the dream was shown to be incompetent, bumbling, accidentally shooting a woman in the next room and then having to kill another witness to his first fuck up, but ending on him being hired, holding a blue key that looks like a normal real key and not a dream puzzle key, may imply that in reality he is a competent hitman that will do exactly what he's paid to do, and it's only in the dream that he will fail to kill Camilla, allowing her to limp away and change her identity because she regretted setting that into motion. Again, this whole practice of trying to define canon within a thing that defies it is our game, not Lynch's. Lynch would say that the film is the thing. Anything else said about it exists to endanger the artistic value or mystery of the thing. Studio Canal, who financed the transition from TV series to feature film, released the DVD, and I actually have it here still. But the anomalous thing about it is how much Lynch was involved in the packaging of this specific release, requesting there be no chapter breaks and personally drafting a little card titled David Lynch's 10 Clues to Unlocking This Thriller, which was always baffling to me. Because if there is one meme that extends beyond film heads, it's that the guy refused to both explain his work or even humor speaking about its meaning.
She's got it, you know it's all on you. But you just, if we're here to love and you look at her in a certain way, then you might...
It's a real-life mystery why he felt the need to include clues. In context, I can imagine a number of reasons, but they all sound like things he would refute vociferously. It's worded so plainly, it could appear on a practice guide for a high school quiz. If anything, what the clues reveal is how particular and deliberate the construction of the film is. There is a continuity in there, and maybe that will sock it into place for you, but there will always be room to dream. And this little card is pretending to proffer simple answers to the mystery, but really it's just part of it. And me, the film head, pulling my hair out, attempting to appear as though I even mildly get it, is also part of it.
Okay, now I've got you where I want you. And Ken, you told me that your picture spoke for itself, but tonight Naomi Watts told me that she plays, as far as she knows, between 3 and 6 characters.
How you doing, Roger?
This year would also see the release of Remedy's Max Payne, which was stuffed with references and reverence for Twin Peaks and its alternate dimension full of backwards talking weirdos.
The flamingo speaks. It can speak here. It says,
Mirrors are more fun than television.
Mirrors are more fun than television. Somehow I know this, just don't ask me how.
Its writer, Sam Lake, would a decade later get to further explore his appreciation for the work of Lynch in Alan Wake and kind of everything they've made since in some way. In many ways, Sam Lake is like the gaming industry's David Lynch, in that he writes these brilliant, imaginative games that usually get fucked over by a publisher or just don't turn a profit. It kind of just making it by. That's what I mean.
Don't wake up the dreamer if your life is a dream.
It's somewhat appropriate that Lynch's last film would be an expression of him at his most free and creatively unrestrained.
I'm trying to think of another film, and the ideas are starting to trickle in, but it hasn't hit yet. And I got to do these other things, you know, and so that's the way it goes. Just a second.
as well as the most challenging for audiences. In the 5 years between films, he had fallen in love with consumer-grade digital cameras.
It's not good quality, but I just love the ease of it.
They evoked in him a sort of nostalgia, yet new, modern, full of possibility, rekindling an energy he felt making shorts on a 35mm. It had its own learning curve and capacity for beauty and ugliness, and certainly the instant gratification that came with finding an idea and immediately filming it with no film crew buzzing around and interfering, with just him holding a camera and pointing it at things. The cast, which is again a montage of former David Lynch players and Jeremy Irons, were simply handed scenes for the day. That day they'd film that scene and be sent home with another scene, and there was no Bible they were being pulled from, it was just the newest idea. Much like the last 2 titles, this one just struck him and he began to fish for ideas. During a phone call with Laura Dern, she mentioned that her husband was from the Inland Empire area, the collection of cities most inland in Southern California, and she began to phase out into Charlie Brown's teacher honks, and he was thinking, that's it. I like the word inland and I like the word empire. The result, a story about an actress named Nikki, played by Laura Dern, who lands a role in a fictional romance film to be titled On High in Blue Tomorrows, acting opposite Justin Theroux's character Devin. After they begin running through some of their scenes, they all get creeped out when it seems someone has snuck onto the lockdown set. This prompts the director and his assistant to explain that the film they are making is technically not an original script. It's an adaptation of a Polish folktale, and there was a previous effort to make the film, but it was left unfinished after its 2 leads were murdered. Since then, there has been rumor that the project is cursed. This is maybe the most straightforward info dump in any piece of David Lynch media, yet it results in some of the most difficult to follow shit soon after. They give you a good hour to think, okay, I got this. And then...
This monkey shits everywhere, but she doesn't care.
Despite the pleas of the entire crew, Nikki and Devin, both separately married, begin to have an affair, and Nikki starts losing track of what's a scene from the movie and what isn't, or even where she is in time and space. There's a fantastic sequence where she walks through a door in an alley to find that she's entered the movie set from behind, and witnesses the read-through scene from earlier, making it so that it was her who was the intruder. She then begins seeing her husband watching over her, but she screams for help. Not Devin, but Billy, the character that Devin is playing, and this doesn't seem to break through whatever veil separates them. Inland Empire is very, very interesting in tone, because if you came up watching cable television, you can sort of unknowingly come to associate certain video qualities and textures as a sign of cheapness or disposability. He's using the camera that creates trash content to film this elaborate, cerebral, and surreal thriller, but one that is also set in the same world that would create said trash. There's a part 20 minutes in where Nikki and Devin go on a daytime talk show to plug their next movie, and for the duration of that, it clicks into place, and it feels like this is the way this should look. But then they leave that scene, and it continues to look like that. Interspersed are these little vignettes that seem to be parodying the canned artificial nature of multicam sitcoms. And it can come off as a critique of a sort of vapid pointlessness peaking in mid-2000s television. Then, 20 minutes after that, I would repeatedly find myself forgetting that it was shot on video entirely, being drawn in by these wild scenes and intense performances, reminded only when the lens would flare in a strange way or a shot got particularly unsteady. He gets so many extreme close-ups that there simply is no way that at least a few people didn't get bonked on the snoot. There are scenes in which Laura Dern is playing different versions of herself, reliving some cycle of the folktale's origin, with modern day scenes playing out identically in 1930s Poland. Of all of Lynch's work, I think this one most defies attempts to psychoanalyze, but there is this constant stream of tantalizing crumbs. They tease you with the possibility possibility that this really does connect in a coherent fashion and explore an overarching theme. I certainly feel like this is, again, not a one-type movie, but it is most consistently producing the feeling of discomfort, even when you've become unmoored from recognizable logic, and it feels as though you're just lost in this thing, fully on board with its erratic behavior. It suddenly breaks form after this hauntingly bizarre death scene to reveal that this was part of the film within the film, where once you could determine that someone was a dreamer and part of the film was a dream, Inland Empire is more like a waking nightmare. Sometimes it seems like there is direction from on high, and other times that direction is unclear. Perhaps Nikki has literally lost herself in the role of Sue, and it's overriding her own experience. If there is one thing I can hold on to, there are numerous iterations of the same events playing out over at least 2 different timelines.
Look at me and tell me if you've known me before.
Spójrzcie na mnie. Widziałyście mnie kiedyś?
By losing herself in the role of Sue, Nikki is forced to repeat the tragic tale in modern day. A year after Inland Empire, Lynch would supplement the film's already 3-hour runtime with a further hour and 15 minutes of quite literally Other Things That Happened, titled appropriately More Things That Happened. And, you know, as far as I can tell, this lives up to its name, in that it's not mandatory viewing. It just asks if, after watching that film, you had 1 more hour in you. I have this particular affinity for whatever dream train Lynch was riding for this film, and I think it's because it's the most relatable. Inland Empire and the numerous experiments that would find purpose as Inland Empire came together with just Lynch and a Sony PD-150. I feel like around the same time frame, 2005 or so, I was making many similar experiments, though I called them tests, and they were made with a Panasonic Handycam, and they were similarly somewhat random things I felt like filming without any initial idea for their purpose. It was just I wanted to record that in the moment, and later I would apply effects or add music, some of which, funnily enough, was music from David Lynch projects. I dug up an old disc of them when I moved recently. But even though it was the hardest barrier to get people on board with a tenured director using the same medium that amateur porn and snuff films are created with, this was the most I understood his creative drive, and it was genuinely exciting seeing what he could do with something I could have had access to at my local community college or some shit. I think that spirit has followed me in some sense. I don't know if it's an arrogance or a naivety or a stubbornness, but it says, just make it. Just make things. If there is a joy in the work, make the thing. If there is no joy in the work on something else. If you've ever bounced off of Inland Empire, but you're still a fan of Lynch, you know, you just couldn't follow him to this specific world, I very much recommend tracking down a 2007 documentary called Lynch, which was filmed during the production of Inland Empire and shows these little snapshots of him on the set or just making other shit in his studio. And what I was so taken by was how sharp, goofy, and passionate he was about the project, to a positive and negative effect.
What's that buzzing?
It's the lights.
Fuck. Drive you nuts. Damn.
You get the impression that this was the most evolved form of his creative process, that it was bordering on Dale Cooper logic. If you already have the slightly destroyed AI upscaled Criterion release, then it's on there already along with The Art Life, which is a more artsy and moody doc that's pretty good. There's this great sequence in Lynch where he's in Poland to shoot for Inland Empire, but he goes on a side adventure to photograph abandoned factories, and there's a lot of super relatable moments of him looking at rusty machinery and paint peeling from walls with the documentarian, and them both saying, "Fuck, that's sick."
Isn't that a beauty? Oh my God.
That was absolutely another thing I used to do. I have a whole photo album of like construction sites and alleyways that I'd photograph, so they were right to say, "Fuck, that's sick." But you also see how much it kills him when production is stalled, or things just aren't going precise to his vision. At one point he's having trouble getting a hold of Laura Dern, or Tidbit as he called her, and he's just like scolding her like a father that's disappointed, like he just walked in on his son painting his nails, for a completely random example.
I'm a little bit mad, and I understand, you understand, and I'll talk to you after lunch.
And then he just hangs his head and tries to work out something he can do during this lull. And I found that to ring true with myself in that I don't ever get bored. I don't think I've legitimately been bored in over a decade, but I do feel a creeping, crushing, wasting away feeling, like I should be working on something and I'm not, falling behind on a schedule I made up anyways.
Okay, sweetie. Okay, I love you, tidbit. I love you, sweetie. I love you.
What followed Inland Empire was a great drought of Lynch. While he was still working on several projects, from short films to furniture, he simply wasn't producing films or TV. So that space in between Inland Empire and 2017's Twin Peaks: The Return produced a great deal of creators attempting to fill the void with a medium he never really got to work in. One of the first big ones, big was in quotes, was 2010's Deadly Premonition, a game that is perhaps more well known for being bizarre and broken than it is for being a direct continuation of Mazurna Falls' attempt at creating a Twin Peaks simulation.
A small traditional North American town close to the Canadian border. A peaceful, traditional place. However, that peaceful town is shattered by a terrible crime, the murder of a local girl. And that incident causes grief and sadness to everyone in town. But everyone feels the seditious, heinous evil still lurking, alive. Yes, much like the situation right now here in Grimbeard.
I wouldn't be surprised if a large percentage of gamers who played it or watched someone play it had no idea how hardcore it was mirroring a television show from before they were born.
This is a good biscuit. I've never tasted a biscuit this delicious. Where in town can I get these?
I think it is a fascinating thing to examine, because while there is a shameless quality to some of what it's doing, it is distinctly Japanese, struggling to capture the Americana that informs so much of his work through the telephone game of translation. Foolishly ambitious and full of gameplay mechanics that were forced in last minute, which everybody hated and thought was stupid, and that's just about as truly Twin Peaksian as you could get. Games got away with this more for whatever reason. Maybe there were shows that got a piece, just a little taste of it like your picket fences or your Carnival, but nobody was out here trying to create a market replacement for Twin Peaks. So if you happen to be a fan of the show and a gamer, you were probably eating better than other fans. I mean, yeah, it was reheated. It was dried out, weeks-old pizza, Lynch, but I think I speak for all of us when I say pizza is pizza. These two games were oddities with some merit, but there are many games that pull from Lynch in different ways, from just including a scene or a character cut out of his work to using one of his ideas as a springboard to create a new dream. 2012's Alan Wake being one of the more successful as far as balancing the Northwest small town, full of quirky characters hiding a dark secret, with a wealth of other influences like the writing of Stephen King and shows like The Twilight Zone. It is most assuredly doing a Twin Peaks thing, but it does have all these other themes and motifs and ideas pulled from Sam Lake's personal experiences, putting it in this odd limbo between homage to a specific thing Lynch did, but in part using his artistic philosophies to splinter from that.
I always say it's like there's a man in another room with the whole film together, but they're in puzzle parts, and he's flipping one piece at a time into me. And at first it's very abstract, I don't know, have a clue. More pieces come, more ideas are caught, it starts forming a thing. It comes like on a TV in your mind.
Beyond this nightmare from home, they sink down to the bottom of this ocean. I catch them. Visions, echoes, big fish. Some are actual events, some are forgotten ideas. No, it's good. No, it will work. They're my inspiration, elements for my story to make it more true, even the parts that aren't true.
I'm honestly a way bigger fan of its sequel, which is just a beautiful creation that does much the same thing, magnifying its influence from Twin Peaks to just Lynch media as a whole, yet doing a better job at finding its own voice, allowing it to enter a shared universe with their other title, Control, which had its own fixation on Lynch. Also a great game. The feat that Alan Wake 2 pulls off is not so much in borrowing from the third season of Twin Peaks, which it certainly does. down to the transition between characters looking remarkably like Lynch's animation style, but it elegantly rhymes ideas from The Return with their own story and characters.
They played cards in the general store.
I've been to one of their meetings. It was above a convenience store.
So yes, you have a man that's been stuck in another world that suddenly returns, but he comes back with something from that other place burrowed away inside him. Meanwhile, another version of him attempts to escape from that place, literally being written in circles to occupy him and allow his double to wreak havoc on his loved ones. The once wholesome mountain town retains a cheerful veneer, but in the absence of our hero, a violent darkness has seized more ground. But it's not just that, it also introduces several new characters as well as a new co-protagonist that is almost more compelling than the title character, and allows the gameplay and story to hop back and forth between investigative and dreamy until the two collide and it becomes investigatorily dreamy. It also expands on returning characters, elevating them to be hugely meaningful. Like many of Lynch's films, Alan Wake 2's story plays with loops, spirals, operating like a Mobius strip. Lost Highway, Mulholland Drive, and Inland Empire all sort of end where they begin, in so many words, where the purpose and chronology of two different timelines slowly come into still bleary focus.
In the dreams, I'm often someone else, a different person with a different name, living a different life in a different world. Alternate realities, maybe. But certain things don't change.
Playing through it made me think about Lynch's body of film and TV work, how in a way taking it in also functions the same. Twin Peaks began as maybe the most accessible thing with Lynch's name on it, as though he snuck in his weird esoteric mythology shit into the format of the soap opera. So it has quite a mainstream appeal, far away from Eraserhead.
Boy, I like that show. Didn't understand it, but shit, I like that.
Brilliant. I have absolutely no idea what's going on.
But Fire Walk With Me into The Return is an increasingly apparent return to where he started. There is so much of Eraserhead in it, as though he was revisiting old dreams, now that he had more room for them, full of strange otherworldly beings in rooms inaccessible to man, operating seemingly the gearworks and levers of reality. Nearly the entirety of its 8th episode is devoted to such dreaming, and the wild experimentation of his earlier work, in abstract black and white meditation on the very idea of darkness.
Got a light? Got a light?
Due to the occasionally odd editing choices and home-cooked visual effects, it almost feels like that world is seeping into figures from other worlds he's played around in. Worlds of detectives, women in trouble, crazy kids in love, criminals, hitmen, and monsters. You know, I try to not be cynical about his loss. I try to focus on all the little embers still sizzling after the greater flame was extinguished. I was trying to think about what it is I even mean when I say that a David Lynch only comes once in a lifetime. It might be that he was always an outsider to the system, but he got to take advantage of the system several times. There are modern films that I've seen that have a lot of inventiveness and skillful wielding of the art of filmmaking. I'm not laboring under the delusion that with his passing, interesting films will cease to be made, but even with a distinct voice and in some cases an auteur spirit, those were all directed by directors. David Lynch movies were directed by a painter who wanted to make his paintings move and have sound.
And so he's here like this and points his gun at her. She didn't see him come in.
Who could close his eyes and just know that he really needs there to be a monkey in the background of this scene. The idea is talking to him and saying that's what it wants to be. And he'd have enough pull that within the day, he'd get that monkey. And there will come a time that some dork on the internet says, guys, that monkey thing, brilliant. In that same doc, they have on video Lynch getting the call back from Jeremy Irons about being in Inland Empire. And it's completely circumventing standard procedure. He's just like, look, Jeremy, I don't know what this thing is yet, but if you want to experiment with me, I have a role for you.
And I don't know exactly what it is, but it's starting to come together.
And at some point in this bizarre explanation, he agrees to be in it.
Cool.
And after hanging up, immediately calls Laura Dern and tells her, like as though a new friend is coming over to play Fusion Frenzy.
Tidbit, Jeremy's probably gonna do it.
And then we see David explaining to her the sequence where her character loops into the previous scene. And she puts together in the moment like what he's doing, and they share a little, oh fuck, that's sick kind of exchange.
Oh, that's the Valley House. Yeah. I'm so scared right now.
It brings me an immense joy knowing that this man got to create as much as he did, and that even when he's clearly angry, stressed out, or depressed on set, it's only because a bottleneck has stopped him from the joy of creating.
You doing all right?
Mm-hmm.
But when the wheels were moving, when the thing was becoming a thing, he was right where he wanted to be. And wherever he is now, I wish for beautiful blue skies and golden sunshine all along the way. Everyone, have a great day.